Halloween. It's that time of year where the paranormal becomes normal, where the ghosts, ghouls, and goblins come out to wreak havoc upon the neighborhoods. It used to be my favorite time of the year. Growing up, I absolutely adored Halloween. It was a holiday that truly catered to children. Yes, on Christmas, children would collect presents, and on Easter, egg hunts were always a fun activity. But there was just something about Halloween that evoked an almost primal excitement in children. The act of dressing up as your favorite character or monster, then prowling the streets collecting free candy. What's not to love, am I right? When I was a kid, there wasn't anything better in the entire world. I was a fan of horror from an early age. I remember the first time I saw a horror movie. I was scared so badly it took 2 full weeks before I could sleep peacefully. Even though a lot of stuff terrified me as a child, I still loved the thrill. My parents used to take me through haunted houses and hayrides every October. But what really instilled a love for the holiday was the candy. I was always that kid who would venture far beyond my parental parameters in search of the better candy. The day of Halloween, friends would bombard me with rumors of which houses are giving out the king-size candy bars, chips, and other high-quality sweets. Usually, when I was told about this, I would realize that those rumored houses were always at the edge of town, far beyond my 2-block radius that I was allowed to tread. However, that rarely stopped me. I would trek long into the night and not return until late in the evening. As I grew older, the distance became that much greater. I wasn't the only one staying out that extra hour, or traveling an extra block to fatten my pillowcase. I would often see a few other kids in groups traveling all over, and I would hide behind trees whenever I'd spy a group of teenagers on bikes. You may think that stuff only happens in movies, but you'd be wrong. I've had my candy stolen from me twice, the 2 worst Halloweens of my childhood. Once I grew out of my candy hunting phase and began focusing solely on my hormones, my love for Halloween diminished, but never disappeared. Through my teenage years, I would help my mother in decorating the house, then head off to a Halloween party some kids from school was usually throwing. After high school, Halloween drifted further from my mind as work consumed the rest of my time. Working on Halloween was the absolute worst. All the decorations in the store and the atmosphere of fun soon to be had was a constant reminder of how crappy adulthood really was. I did receive a second wind, as it were, when I turned 21, when my desire to trick-or-treat was supplanted by my desire to bar hop with friends, enjoying costume contests and the drunken antics that ensued. I had lived in an apartment at the time, and I always felt bad for the children who lived in apartments as well. Most of the time, the people living in the apartments rarely gave out candy, so the kids either had to venture far out on their own, or have their parents bring them to a neighborhood. Regardless, when I lived there, I always kept a bowl of candy ready on the off chance someone happened to knock on my door. Those knocks never came, of course, and I would always end up devouring the lot of candy on my own in front of the TV, with my stomach cursing me in the morning. After a few years living in the apartment, I made a vow that if I ever bought a house, I would go all out. I would deck the house from top to bottom in decorations, fog machines, and I would have the best candy in the entire neighborhood. It just so happens that when I turned 30, I had worked pretty hard and managed to save up enough money to put a down payment on a house of my very own. The house was extremely small, mind you, and sat on the back edge of a neighborhood with a dead end, with the almost non-existent backyard bordering a small forest. I say forest, but it was one of those suburban forests where they look super dense at night, but in the daytime you can see clear through the other side. The first few nights after I bought the house, I noticed that the streetlights didn't really extend all the way to my house. The dim edge of light barely reached my driveway, thus encasing the rest of my house entirely in darkness. I suppose if you're looking at it just right, the house would appear to be a place where a deranged killer would live. But I digress. The year after I bought the house, I might have gone a bit overboard. I had everything from an inflatable ghost to a horrifying scarecrow to eerie lights plastered all over the place. I was so excited to spend my first Halloween watching old horror flicks and handing out candy. Though, oddly enough, I hardly got any trick-or-treaters. The house I had bought had been on the market for quite some time, so I attributed the lack of kids to that. They probably had been accustomed to thinking that my house never had anything good. When I was a kid, heading towards the house at a dead end rarely paid off, so I avoided them to save some time. It wasn't until much later in the evening did I receive a knock at the door. When I opened it, 2 children, maybe 9 or 10 years old, shouted "trick or treat" at the top of their lungs. I was so happy to have my first trick-or-treaters that I gave them each 3 king-size Snickers bars. Their faces lit up immediately as they grinned to one another before thanking me and running off. I repeated the gesture for a couple more times before it was eventually time to turn out the lights. After wandering around my yard for a moment, switching off the plethora of glowing orange light bulbs, I finally headed inside. It was around 11:30 at night when I plopped into my chair to finish the 3rd movie I had started that night. Upon sitting down, I heard the softest of taps at my door. At first, I thought it must have been the TV, but as I waited, listening more intently, I heard the taps once again. It almost sounded like someone unsure if I was still awake or not. So I rose from my chair, grabbed what remained of my candy bowl, and made my way towards the door. In a quick, fluid motion, I grabbed the doorknob and pulled the door open. There was no one there. I scratched the top of my head a bit perplexed before taking a half step outside and looking around my darkened yard. Even though I had powered down the lights and fog machines, the fog still lingered across my lawn. I strained my eyes, but I was unable to see anyone. Thinking I was too late and that the kids must have moved on at that point, I headed back inside. As soon as I shut my door, I heard that same tap directly on the other side. I froze. I had my back to the door and something in my soul was screaming at me not to turn around. I knew the feeling I had was unwarranted. But what unnerved me was the fact that a second before, I was standing on the porch without a soul in sight. Slowly, I turned to face the door. Every primal instinct in my body screamed not to open it. Somehow, I managed to drum up enough adrenaline in my body to grip the doorknob and open it once again. Once again, there was no one on the other side. As I stood there, I noticed that the nearby streetlight had turned itself off, so now my entire house was now bathed in blackness. I scanned my yard carefully, trying not to pay any mind to the candy bowl that rattled nervously in my hand. For a moment, I thought I saw something move in the fog before it faded into darkness. I stepped backwards through the threshold of my doorway and quickly shut and locked the door. As soon as the deadbolt latched, it sounded as if someone had slammed their hands on the other side of the door. The blow was so powerful, I could hear the wood groan as it tried to resist. The unexpected shock sent me falling to the floor. The banging on my door only happened 3 times before everything became still and silent. A part of my mind attempted to rationalize this as some teenage punks trying to scare the crap out of me, similar to Ding Dong Ditch. That was until I heard a new sound coming from directly on the other side of the door. Growling. It may sound strange, but the growling didn't sound like a beast or an animal. It sounded human, as if a zombie were on the other side of my door. Maybe some kid dressed as a zombie wanted to commit to his costume a little too much. I managed to pull myself to my feet and make my way to my phone and called the cops. This might have been overkill, but I wasn't taking any chances. The police informed me that since it was Halloween, it might take a few minutes to make it out to me, but that they would send a squad car right over. During this time, I heard no sound, no noise whatsoever from outside my house. As I sat there staring at the door, I kept getting this feeling like something was watching me. A few minutes passed by and there was a knock at the door. I paused for a moment before I heard, "Police, we're here about the distress call." Slowly, I opened the door and stared at the officer before my gaze drifted to my now illuminated front yard from the police car. All of my decorations had been destroyed. My inflatable ghost was torn to pieces and strewn about my lawn. My lights had been ripped off my house, and one of my fog machines appeared to have been partially crushed. But that wasn't even the worst of it. I then saw the other side of my door. The paint was torn away from the places where the impact sounded from. My doormat was completely shredded. I was unsure how all of this could have been possible in such a short amount of time. But what really confused me was that I had only heard knocking. Doing this type of damage to someone's decorations should have caused a big ruckus. But I heard nothing between the knocks and the police showing up. I informed the officer about what I had experienced, and he was just as confused as I was. He searched the entire area only to come up empty-handed, of course, and then told me that he would be in the area all night. After telling me to file a formal report at the police station in the morning, he left. Even though I didn't hear a single noise the rest of the night, I still didn't go to sleep. I'm not sure who or what did this to me, but I haven't given out candy since then, nor have I decorated my house. Every Halloween, I lock down my entire house. Then I go to stay at one of my friend's house for the night. This year, I'm currently staying with a friend of mine who lives in an apartment complex. He tells me he never gets any trick-or-treaters, so we don't have to worry about anything. But it's 11:30 at night right now, and my friend and I just heard a faint knocking coming from his door. And I don't think either of us are going to answer it tonight.